Hi there. So pandemic Fife home buyers are reselling. We're going to talk about the question as to why. So this is a really interesting one. So why are so many Fife homes that were bought during the pandemic returning to the market today? It was a mental time if you were in a estate agency, and everyone experienced it. But absolutely, in the summer of 2020, Fife's property market, like many others in the UK, roared back to life after weeks of pandemic lockdown. And we're going to talk about what that looked like. In the meantime, though, if you want to click on the link above, you'll get all of the article. If you want to take a quick 8-10 minutes to read that through, it'll give you some really good insights. But it was a strange time in history, Sophie, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. But it seems like a distant memory now.
I know, 5 years ago this was.
I know.
A long time. So the pause in British housing market created a bottleneck, of course. We went into lockdown. Nobody could view houses. Nobody could exchange houses. Solicitors weren't open. Us as an estate agency, we were quite inventive, and that's where our pre-portal and personal property tours came from, because we still had to show homes. So obviously following guidelines, we had to do that when they were empty, etc. But there was creative ways of doing it. But there was a huge pause, wasn't there? And this bottleneck had built up of properties that just couldn't go anywhere. But people's lives didn't change, and they still needed to move. So it was, how did they make that happen? It was a real difficult time for people. But when those doors reopened, gosh, we thought it would maybe take months to sell, but suddenly it was attracting, houses were attracting multiple buyers in a matter of days because everyone was desperate to move. And actually, people maybe actually were looking at homes, had no intentions of doing so before lockdown, had they? And then we were all indoors. We were living on top of one another. We maybe had relatives living with us because once we went into lockdown, we couldn't then mingle. So whoever was in your habitat and your bubble at that time had to stay in it. And it became a whole different way of life. And I think a lot of people went a bit stir crazy. Would be my thought.
Yes, absolutely. And then that was probably the evolution of working from home as well. And then that, in that sense, working from home, and what did that look like for people? So that had an impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So people had lots of different reasons all of a sudden for why they wanted to move. But the average asking prices as well, they jumped so sharply because supply and demand is that thing, isn't it? And more people wanted them. So if they were wanting to secure that property, they knew they had to offer over the price as well. So it was fueled by a combination of limited supply. Government incentives, of course, also came into play, such as temporary land and buildings taxes. The transaction taxes were kind of non-existent for some time, weren't they? So actually there was such a rush of buyers coming to the market, rethinking their living arrangements, as you said as well, Sophie. For many, the pandemic was a nudge to make some changes in life. And we saw that, a sweep through everybody's homes that we were going to. Once we were able to get back into property, we were seeing such a change in how people were living, what they thought that they needed, versus what maybe they wanted, to actually the reality of how do I exist with my family? What does it look like? So we saw lots of things, and there was lots of impulsive triggers going on for people as well. People were being very reactive because we were out and we were able to do what we wanted to do. But buyers, again, who were maybe cooped up in flats, suddenly had their freedom back as well, didn't they? And so in many cases that we saw, people then suddenly wanted to have gardens, they wanted outside space because they've been confined for such a long time. So they also, as you said, Sophie, they wanted home offices because actually their employer hadn't come up with a solution yet as to working from home. It's not everyone that was very proactive with that, wasn't it? So, some people were sitting for months and months before they could work out how they were going to get back to work. Some people worked in semi-rural locations as well, and then suddenly your Wi-Fi doesn't work for you. Your employer now wants you to work at home, but you've not got the capacity to do that at home. So all of these pressure points were really coming together and making it really quite complex for some people, wasn't it? But in those frenzied months of kind of 2020 to 2021, the competition was fierce. all of my colleagues that work in a estate agency and other areas that agencies that I've spoken to as well had never seen anything like it. Homes were being listed on a Friday and they were being sold by Monday. We actually had a property we sold on Christmas Day. It was just crazy how the market went at that point. But everybody as well was offering well over the asking prices. And I think that's what made the difference. So obviously we've got the home report that structures what your kind of offers over are. And people were just blowing that number out of the water because they wanted to secure that house. They were desperate to get moved. But also within all of that, people had no social life in that time. So they weren't spending their money either. They were saving quite a bit too. So that was freeing up a lot of income for people as well, wasn't it? So that was quite an interesting turn of events as well. So many buyers were willing to compromise on location, condition, and amenities just to secure that house because it ticked the boxes of what they needed to do. Now, certain mainstream newspapers, news reports saying, there'll be a flood of homeowners come to the market's going to be saturated, there'll be a post-pandemic rush, the market won't survive it. But before we look at what happened in Fife, let's explore why this really could be happening again. So why are these homes coming back to the market today, Sophie?
Good question. And there is several factors that kind of come into play with this. First one being changing work patterns. 2020, many people were told that they could work from home indefinitely, something they'd never had before, and then they had the potential then to work from home. So it made that perhaps longer commute or any kind of commute irrelevant. You're only walking perhaps down the stairs or through into the dining room. There's no commute anymore.
Exactly.
Since 2022, more employers have been encouraging and even some mandating a return to the office, even if it is just for part of the week or some days of the week, something that at the time when this was all happening, it was never part of it was never getting factored in. So those people that kind of went to that semi-rural or countryside because they didn't need to be in an office space or a city, it then meant, okay, so this is now going to add to my day. It's going to add a commute. It's going to add to costs as well. Perhaps they actually got rid of their car because they weren't going to be commuting anymore. And then now actually they're going to need to factor that into their household income and bills. So there's all these different things. So that's your change in work pattern. Then as well, big part to play with it is mortgage costs. Because if you remember back as well, while all this was going on, mid-2020, you were getting like 5-year fixed mortgage rates and, about 75% loan to value, where we're just above 2%. So now they're hovering, obviously, yes, base rates did drop, and obviously now it's hovering more around your 4%. But that is still something people were factoring in when they were taking on this new lifestyle and property. So for households that perhaps stretched themselves financially during the pandemic, this then created like a real pressure point, especially if perhaps you're coming to the end of your fixed year deal. In some cases, the only way to manage rising costs is to then look at downsizing or moving to a more affordable area. So again, these are things that people were factoring in, was their mortgage costs. Yes, that's great that we weren't socializing and doing all these things, but we still had bills to pay. The bills didn't stop just because the world stopped. The bills still had to be paid. So people are still factoring that into obviously what their life looks like moving forward. Then as well, I think for a lot of people, we all kind of did like almost a step back and almost had like a lifestyle reassessment, because actually during the pandemic, the appeal for kind of space was so overwhelming because we went from having our freedom, something we never thought we would lose, to then being cooped up and tripping over each other and being bored probably. But people were looking for more outdoor space, so people went and bought properties with outdoor space, but then they've realized now coming out of this, it's that they've still got to maintain it. That garden's still there. So we have to upkeep with it. Again, the costs of that. Perhaps people went to, again, that countryside lifestyle. Then now they've realized now we're all back to kind of normality, or what we can class as normality. They have to do the commute to the shops, schools, anything that they want to do in terms of leisure facilities. So some people have found, things that back in the pandemic era they were willing to compromise on. Now they're realizing that they compromise perhaps too much, or they're adjusting bent over a barrel.
And I think the lifestyle part is a really big part to play in it as well. And certainly when you look at young children who were maybe born in that time as well, and now they're kind of going to schooling, or they were missing out on nursery, and so they've got so many development requirements, some of the children now, that actually living in a rural setting where they're not learning those life skills has put a lot of pressure on parents, and parents are suddenly having to reassess that, aren't they, and say, well, actually, we're going to have to move closer to town where there's more activities, there's more children their age groups, they can get interacting more, they can get outside and play more, they can be mixing more, because some of that skill set was lost, wasn't it? And so children, actually, pandemic babies now, as young toddlers stroke going to school this year, have struggled. So parents have had to really assess that, and something really actually as parents we've never probably had to experience or factor into our choices before. Suddenly it's a big part to play in your family's happiness and development and the joy that they get from their lives.
Absolutely, and that is a big part of it. And then another part, and obviously this is a topic we speak quite a lot of because there has been a lot of changes, and especially in particular areas like the East Neuk and St Andrews, but it's the second home pressure as well. You know, for those that were in a position during the pandemic to purchase a second home, perhaps they were looking, they wanted something coastal, or perhaps they wanted somewhere to escape to during the pandemic. They wanted that rural coastal setting, so they purchased a second home and snapped something up. But now they're actually facing higher running costs, the newer, the additional council tax that they have to pay. Obviously, that came into play that wasn't in play in the pandemic. That came out of nowhere that people weren't expecting. So they paid so much over, one, to secure a property perhaps in a coastal village, two, to secure it in obviously a market that people were paying for that demand. Oh, and then now they're still getting hit with it, and they're having to pay additional council tax, running costs. Perhaps people then was like, you know what, I'll go down the Airbnb route to get something back from my return. And then they do that, but then obviously legislation changed for Airbnb, so they feel like they're getting fired at from all angles. So this really has pushed some to sell, which then added to more properties hitting the market, and especially in, you say, East Neuk and St Andrews, where, like Perrie said, there was a bottleneck has occurred, and we're seeing a bottleneck even now in those particular areas.
And I think the big part of that as well, and to kind of just run on from that, was actually you did see the final part of that for me was kind of buyer remorse, wasn't it? Because they had basically, in the heat of the pandemic and the property boom, they maybe made decisions based on emotions rather than practicalities. They made them quickly with limited viewing opportunity, because not all agents did what we did and then created the video so you could feel like you had walked through the house. And they simply basically bought properties, actually, that what they're finding now just don't work for their lifestyle and don't work for the choices that they've made. And it doesn't suit them, or it hasn't turned out how they'd hoped, or they've made it. We talk about emotion a lot when we talk about houses, didn't they? And I think they've maybe done it in an emotional way rather than a practical way. And then suddenly today they're going, hang on, we're going to need to reassess things now. Because, as you said, they've probably taken on maybe 4-year, 5-year fixed mortgages. Well, they're all coming up for renewal, aren't they now?
Yep.
And so it's hitting things. So let's look at some of the cold hard facts, Sophie. I think that this would be a good part. I think we've got a graph to show in this as well. It'd be an interesting one to share. Yeah. So what we've got here in this graph, so the yellows are home sellers in 2025, and the reds are pre-COVID home sellers from 2016 to 2019. So in the years before COVID, between 2016 and 2020, 29.4% of homes that sold had been owned for 5 years or less. Over the last 12 months, that figure has risen to 34.1%, a proportional rise of 16%. That's a massive rise. It's not a flood, but it's a big rise. If we extended that time frame to 7 years or less, the difference narrows from 44.6% in COVID compared with 48.4% in the past year. But the real change lies in when people are moving. So pre-COVID, more sales happened in years 5 and 6 of ownership. But today there is clear uplift in people moving earlier, particularly in years 3 and 4. So what we're seeing, and what we mean by that, is someone was in their home, before COVID, they would live in it maybe for 5 or 6 years, then think of selling. What we're seeing now, since COVID, people who've bought in that time scale, is that actually they're only staying in the properties for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then they're moving. So you can see that bump there in year one, 2.7 versus 3.7. So 2025 home sellers versus pre-COVID. And then in year two, 5.2 versus 3.2. Year three, 8.4 versus 4.8. Year four, 9.4 versus 5.8. And year five, that's the example that we're giving, is that it was 11.9 versus 8.4. So you're definitely seeing that rise on that curve there in the middle of basically people who bought and sellers in 2025 selling in a much quicker time than they probably historically would have done. That's quite a stark image. Definitely one for you to follow up as well. So again, if you want to click on the link, you'll be able to kind of get a better view of that and the breakdown of it. But it's a stark difference, isn't it? If we look at the property market stats as a whole, for instance, so let's look at the stats locally. Let us see what's happening in Fife, for instance. So of the 1,612 homes that are currently for sale or sold, 186 of those were purchased between the middle of May 2020 and the end of December 2021. So that's quite a stark. So 186 of those homes were bought between May 2020 and December of 2021, meaning 11.5% of Fife's homes that were bought in that 18 months of lockdown are currently back in the market, either available or subject to sale. Agreed.
Wow.
It's a large percentage, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Do you want to cover what that split might look like?
Yeah, of course. So we'll start with the detached style of properties. So there's actually 23. So 23 of that split go to detached only, which then is the 6.4%. Then we move down to semi-detached, which contributes to 27 of that, which as a percentage is 10.5% of the semi-detached Fife homes for sale. Then moving to your terrace townhouse style properties, that actually contributes to 45 of that 186 when you split it down, which is a 12.9%. Then you've got bungalows, which is the lowest, which contributes to 16 of that overall number.
They always perform well, don't they? So you would expect that.
Yes, which represents 10.8%. And then the highest out of them all is your flats and your apartments, which contribute to 53 of that 186, which is 10.6% of the flats and apartments that are for sale. Obviously, flats and apartments, it's just due to the affordability, who will appeal to them, and obviously again the changes as well that obviously have come into play for landlords, etc., which do tend to go towards flats and apartments. So that is actually how it is split down. But I think a good question here to ask is kind of, so what is the impact then on house prices in Fife? What does that actually mean? Because across the country, the total number of properties for sale is at its highest since 2013, and Fife is actually no exception to that. Now, compared with the height of the pandemic, stock levels locally have risen sharply, especially in certain micro regions. While more choice is obviously good news for buyers out there, absolutely, it does create more a kind of challenging environment for Fife home sellers, especially those who overpaid in the heat of the market. And we do see that. And it's even more so when they've overpaid for it to purchase it. And then we go out to properties, Perrie, and then they've spent 50, 60 plus, then doing it all up. And they already overpaid to begin with. Then they've put so much into it.
Yeah.
And it's actually gut wrenching when you actually have to have that really honest and realistic conversation with them. But, the property price growth of the pandemic years has slowed down. Between mid-2020 and September of 2022, average prices in Fife rose significantly as the rush for space really did play out. But actually, in the last 2.5 years, house growth has been a wee bit flatter, we would say. Homes that are priced correctly still sell well. And that is the key here. Houses that are priced correctly still sell well. And that's not to say we're going to undervalue them, but we're also not going to overvalue them. It's gone are the days where we walk in and go, name your price. What number? What do you want? Those days are gone. Overpricing is particularly risky in a market with, let's face it, a lot more competition. In the last 3 months, 35.7% of the 768,500 homes for sale had to reduce their prices. Let that just sink in for a second.
That's a large sum.
In just 3 months, which is a big number, 35.7. So based on that then, Perrie, do you have any advice for, Fife house sellers?
Absolutely. If you bought during the pandemic and are now considering selling, there are key things that you need to be realistic about, 100%. So price for today, not for 2021. And I guess that goes back to what you touched on there, Sophie. And it's really important that you do this and you use evidence from recent completions in your area, not what your neighbours sold for, not what your friend has sold for, but actually what is happening now in the areas with properties of a similar type to yourself. That's really important. The second thing is your presentation of your property. In a more cautious market, buyers are drawn to properties that feel turnkey and that they can just go in and that they've been really well maintained and they get that emotional connection with the property when they go in. So that's a really important thing as well. So presentation matters. Also, be ready to negotiate is the next one. So buyers know that there's more choice out there at the moment and they will push for value. And I'm seeing that quite frequently. People say, oh, well, are they going to include some of the furniture or, can the hot tub stay? And so people are wanting those little bits of add-ons, aren't they? And we're definitely seeing that a bit more now. But also, I think lastly, and the most important one for yourself if you're considering selling your property is choose an agent who actually knows their data and can work with you and give you strong guidance and advice. The best agents can show you exactly how your home compares to others, how long these properties that are similar to yours took to sell, what percentage of those achieved the asking price or more, and what was the past selling history of that property like as well. And your agent really needs to be able to demonstrate that so that they've got that knowledge that they can guide you on what is the right market price, the right presentation, and the correct expectations, but also so that they can really negotiate for you and get you the best outcome. And you can only achieve that if you start at the right starting point.
Absolutely.
Looking ahead, what does that look like, Sophie?
Looking ahead, now, it's the harsh reality that it really is unlikely we'll see a return to those kind of intense post-pandemic conditions in the life market anytime soon. The kind of dynamic between supply and demand currently favours buyers. And yes, while there is the fall in mortgage rates, could potentially shift the balance slightly. There is analysts out there that expect this to remain the case as we enter into 2026. Now, Fife homeowners, the lesson that we can take probably from the last 5 years is that property decisions that you make in haste and perhaps rush on can lead to changes of the heart or circumstances sooner than you perhaps expect. Now, whether you're selling or buying, the most successful moves that are done are based on solid research, informed decisions, realistic expectations, and a clear view of what matters to you, your family, and your next home. But to do all that, you have to make informed decisions and don't just do anything, as we say, in haste, because it could potentially lead to regrets.
I think that's the actual perfect place to stop, Sophie.
Me too.
Fantastic. And again, if you would like to look at the stats in more detail, please click on the link. You can read the article. If you've got some questions or actually you've experienced this yourself over the last 5 years, whether they're positive or not so positive, we really would appreciate some feedback and we would enjoy those questions, and it gives us an opportunity to answer them to you as well. And it allows us to share that just with everyone else as well. And that's what they say, don't they? Information share is always a good thing. And until next time, that's it from us. Take care.
Take care. See you later.